Sports Institute has been also around service, corporate culture, about creating patient experiences for our folks here. And so for those employees that happen to be here, you understand that this is something we've been working at, but also an opportunity for us to take this to the next level. I want to thank a longtime friend of the Institute, Mr. Steve Tyke, for making this opportunity happen, and thank Dave Voss and Mayo Construction for their sponsoring this event. We really appreciate your long-term support. And with that, I'd like to welcome you. Welcome Steve Tyke.
Okay, thanks. Thanks everybody. Thanks for driving here. We have such a great organization with us at Orthopedic Sports. By the way, we'd like to welcome our friends not only from Iron County Community Hospital, drove 3 hours to be with us this morning. Thank you guys. We have a wide diversity of organizations with us, and this is what a collaboration is all about, Kurt. Today we have, as Kurt mentioned, a couple of leading thinkers in the healthcare world that we're really proud to have with us. There's also a book that everybody should leave with, back by Linda. Linda in the back of the room. There's a book for everybody today. We'd like to offer the ability to have those books signed, if Kent and Len are able to do that. So we'd like to wait till 9:30 to do that, if that's okay. If you would like your book signed, just bring it up at the conclusion of our workshop, and Kent and Len have graciously offered to do that for us. At Myron, as many of you know, we just don't believe in building buildings, we believe in creating dreams. And how do we bring dreams to life? And today, you're going to hear how one organization, which is known throughout the world as the leading thinker in healthcare services, does that. If you haven't had a chance to read the book, I think once you get through it, and some of you have had that opportunity, once you get through it, you're going to be amazed, not only by the stories, but also by the takeaways that are impactful in that book as well. And to introduce Len and Kent, I'll have Dennis Lynch, our Vice President of Healthcare Services, help us.
Thank you. I've been squiring Len around, and last night his voice was starting to give out on him. And so he said, well, I'll just pick up the phone and call my co-op. And I thought, well, doesn't this guy, I mean, he has a life. How is he going to drop everything to drive over? First of all, we didn't know where he lived. To drive over to be here with Len to support him. He picks up the phone, makes a phone call, spends about 30 seconds on the phone, closes the phone up as if it's just nothing. He says, yep, he's on his way. He'll be here. So Kent drove all night to be here with us, and it just kind of shows the level of commitment that you find in this organization that they studied. And Kent was with Mayo for 17 years as their head of marketing, the only marketing person at that time that they had. And Len has a bio, but if I read it, I'd take up the hour and a half reading it. This is a well-researched. He holds 2 appointments, one in the marketing department at Texas A&M, also in the humanities department. And teaches a course, as we were talking yesterday, about healthcare services and how the patient service and the experience happens. It's the only course that I know of for MBA students. So with the book that we have for you, I think you're really going to enjoy. And then we have a job for you. While you're sitting there listening to this, we'd like you to think of one takeaway that you could do tomorrow with your organization. If you wouldn't mind writing those down, put your name on it, your email address on it, and leave it with us. We'll compile these for you and give them back to you as kind of a summary of what we've heard. So this is just, if you feel like doing it, fine. Steve and I will be in the back of the room. You can leave them with the books, whatever. We just think that we're looking for these little gems that every organization has. And you're going to hear part of that when Len starts talking about Mayo. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Len Berry from Texas A&M. And Kent's going to go first. Oh, Kent's going to go first. See, we've got this well rehearsed. Ken Seltman.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Nice drive across Wisconsin last night. I didn't see much of it, but it was a pleasant drive, and the roads were surprisingly and thankfully quite clear. Len, my colleague, who isn't in full voice today, is going to come on at the end of the talk. We're going to split this up. We give our talk independent of one another. We sometimes share, go back and forth several times, and he's going to do the last part here today, and then we will also leave plenty of time for some question and answer. We're going to begin with the story, and if you've looked at our book, you know that each chapter begins with the story, and this actually is one of the stories. Honey, we're going to the Mayo Clinic. I'm going to read this story as it was given to us by a Mayo Clinic patient. I had a strange discomfort in my throat for at least 2 years, but was told there was nothing to be concerned about. After another year, I was referred to a different physician who told me that I had a tumor on the base of my tongue. He also told me what kind of radical surgery he would have to perform on me. So in the car on the way home, I got my cell phone and I got a hold of my wife and I said, honey, you're not going to believe this. I have cancer and we're going to the Mayo Clinic. 2 weeks later, he was there. I was immensely impressed by Mayo's team approach to treatment. I had 3 doctors, an ENT surgeon, a radiation oncologist, and a medical oncologist. What a difference from anything I'd ever experienced before. I remember Dr. Olson, the surgeon, telling me that he would not operate on me because there were other modalities for treatment, and that one statement made a huge impression on me and boosted my confidence. I had the sense that I was going to receive the best possible care. The team prescribed 35 radiation treatments, 3 chemotherapy treatments, and my initial feelings about the team were so positive that my wife and I decided to stay in Rochester for the treatments. We moved into a hotel for over 3 months. The treatments were grueling, and that's putting it mildly, but I felt blessed to be at Mayo Clinic. For 2 years after my treatment, we returned every 3 months to see the team for follow-up care, and now my visits are every 6 months. Another thing I noticed very quickly was Mayo's operational efficiency. Uncertainty is a very difficult feeling for most people. At Mayo, I never had to wait long for my test results. Not only does this remove uncertainty for the patient, but it allows the physicians to share information quickly. During radiation treatments, I was bolted into a mask so I couldn't move my head. I remember one of my last treatments. I was feeling pretty rough. And I recall saying to Jamie, the young woman who did most of those treatments, Jamie, I sure hope these treatments do some good. And she emphatically replied, I don't hope they do some good. I know they're going to do some good. She said exactly what I needed to hear. Physically, I felt awful, but my morale, my attitude, and feelings of hope were soaring. During my 3-month follow-up visits, I would always find Jamie and tell her, I'm still here and you made a big difference in my life. When you're there every day for 3 months, you come to rely on people like Jamie and Rose, who is the radiation oncology reception desk. For that period of your life, they're a big part of the face of Mayo Clinic. Mayo Clinic is a big healthcare brand, arguably the most well-known and powerful healthcare brand in the world. It is set in an unlikely location, as most of you must know. Rochester, Minnesota is a little town, still barely 100,000 people. When the clinic opened over 140 years ago, it was literally on an outpost on the Great Northern Prairie. Mayo Clinic was founded, or it grew from the work of William Worrell Mayo, who was a country doctor who came to Rochester, Minnesota in the 1860s to perform physicals on soldiers going to the Civil War. He remained in the town, raised his family there, and he developed a strong reputation as a surgeon. His sons, Charles H. on the left, William J. on the right, joined the family business after they completed medical school in the 1880s. They came onto the scene shortly after anesthesia was really developed and proven, and it enabled people to do things in surgery that had never been done before. They were very innovative, and by 1890, there were patients from more than 20 states who were coming to this little town that had no paved streets on the edge of the prairie. In 1914, they moved into the first building ever created specifically to house a group practice of medicine. The building was designed with a lot of forethought, and it was expected to be the building that would meet the needs of Mayo Clinic for all time. However, the practice was growing at over 300% a year during the years of its construction, and so it was actually too small by the time it opened. This building had above the front door there on the lintel the name Mayo Clinic, and that was really the first time that the name of the clinic had been used as Mayo Clinic. Over the next decade and a half, the practice continued to grow. The brothers did lots of innovative things clinically. But then in the 1920s, they began preparing for Mayo Clinic after they were no longer part of the organization. And our book is really about the management philosophy that they developed during this period of time. Think of this, an organization transitioning from two world-renowned leaders who prepared the organization to thrive after they were no longer on the scene. They got so much so right in their lifetimes that the management model that they created today is really more significant than the science they created in the 1890s. All of that has been superseded. But the management approach that they created in their organization is what has enabled the organization to endure. Today, this is the front door of Mayo Clinic. That's the Gonda building. The wave wall of glass connects two buildings. You can see a little bit of the Mayo building, built 10 stories in 1950, another 10 in 1964. It's connected to the new Gonda building, both of those sitting on a square block in the little town of Rochester, Minnesota. Independent healthcare research shows that Mayo Clinic is the unaided choice by over 16% of Americans when they're asked if you were seriously ill and you could go anywhere because of your insurance or your personal finances, where would you choose to go? It's an unaided question asked of healthcare decision makers across the country. 16% of the people think, top of mind, Mayo Clinic. Mayo's mentioned more than twice as often as the next well-known academic medical center. Mayo Clinic built this brand, built this reputation, because its patients have had great experiences there, and they've gone back to their communities all over the United States to tell their story. Over 90%. So over 90%, just so you'll get that, I want to emphasize it. 90% of the patients say good things about Mayo Clinic to other people. And on average, they do it to about 50. More than anything else, what builds and sustains a great healthcare brand is the customer's actual experience in being a customer, or in a healthcare organization, their experience as being a patient. As a result then of the stories that our patients tell to their friends and their family across the United States and around the world, the Mayo Clinic name is embedded in the minds of tens of millions of people. The individual in our opening story hadn't really ever thought about going to Mayo Clinic, but when he got this devastating diagnosis, on his way home, he thought, Mayo Clinic is the answer for me. This is a service branding model that Len developed a number of years ago. I think it may have been first published in 1992. It is a description of how service brands are built. The box at the upper left is the work that the marketing department or the public relations department does in an organization. This is the presentation of the brand by the organization. To a large extent, it's a marketing division function, not totally. But it's the way that the organization wants to be perceived. It might be in the brochures, the website, the advertising, and that, as indicated by the dark arrow there at the top, is a primary input into the awareness of the brand. It helps the community know that the organization, healthcare organization in this case, exists. You go down to the middle box, external brand communications are organization-influenced communications. This would be what newspapers, magazine authors would write about you. You don't control what they say, but you can influence what they say. It also includes the word of mouth that customers convey to other people. The bottom box is the one that we're going to spend most of our time talking about, and this is the customer's actual experience. Customers who experience a brand have that experience being the primary and really only significant indication of how they feel about that brand. The advertising that has been done is of no avail if the experience doesn't square with that. And so this is the primary input into the meaning of the brand that you are creating, the brand that your organization lives. And it's what is in the minds of those consumers then that is the real value that they carry for the organization. These customers also, in that arrow going up to external brand communications, tell the story, as I've already indicated, to their friends and families. Increasingly, they're using blogs or email or electronic communications to do that. So a patient experience can influence what other people begin to think. And the primary input to brand equity then, which is the real value, the differential value that your organization or your brand has over others, comes directly from that patient experience. A marketing professor, Len, and a applied marketing manager, myself, have written a management book. We're marketing professionals, but we've written a management book because we know that managing the experience of the customer, patients in the case of Mayo Clinic and your organization, is really what builds service brands and creates enduring organization. Mayo Clinic has done virtually no advertising over the years. As was mentioned, I came to Mayo Clinic in 1992. It had one person in the marketing department. Customers always have an experience when they interact with an organization. They can't avoid that. They unconsciously read a variety of clues as they walk into a place, as they interact with people. You know, we always assess our environment. We look around, we figure out where we are. We want to know if we're safe. We want to know who's behind us, who's in front of us. What is that greeting? What does that handshake say? Each clue then carries a message. I sit here and look at this beautiful space, and there's some water over there. Well, that water, waterfall is a clue about the kind of organization that we're in here. And the composite of all the clues, from the physical environment to the people that you deal with, create then that total experience that a customer or a patient carries away from an organization. But the plot thickens. In the more variable, complex, and personal the service, the more clue sensitive customers are likely to be. And there is no service that compares with healthcare services. Len, who studied service all of his life, if he had voice to speak right now, would say that he used to think that all customers were the same, because they had been in the other categories that he studied: financial services, hospitality services, retail services. But healthcare is different. And people become very detective-like when they're getting something that's so personal and so complex and so scary as healthcare services. And we're trying to figure out, do these people have their act together? Do they know what they're doing? We're going to talk today about clues, and there are 3 different kinds of clues. I'm going to give a brief introduction here, and then we will expand on them later. Functional clues are, does it work? Orthopedic group, you put in a new knee, does it work? Is the leg the right length? Has the pain gone away? Those are functional clues. Does this service perform as it says it's going to perform? Mechanic clues are the clues emitted by stimuli associated with things, the concrete world, the building we're in. You walk into this building, there are certain clues that you pick up about what kind of organization this organization intends to be. If you walk into a building or space and there's an odor, that odor, if it's pleasant, might say something. If it's unpleasant, it certainly says something else. Humanic clues are the clues that are emitted by people. These are the clues that come from interpersonal interactions, the tone of voice, the level of enthusiasm, how people are dressed, what kind of body language they're giving to you. The clues then influence the perception of the total experience that the customer, the patient, is having in these 3 different ways. Some of them are more rational and others are more emotional in the way they are perceived and the way they operate. The functional clues, the does it work kind of clue, is really a rational act. You can just figure out rationally, is this thing working? But the mechanic clues and the humanic clues affect more the emotional perceptions of the individual. We're going now to probe deeper into each of these types of clues. Functional clues instill confidence by demonstrating competence. Don, from our opening story, was offered a surgical treatment by the doctors at his local university medical center that would have compromised significantly the quality of life for whatever time he had. And that doctor also confided to Don's wife that, in fact, he had less than a year to live. But Mayo Clinic removed surgery from the discussion, and 3 years later, Don is still alive. He has no sign of cancer based on his follow-up treatments at Mayo, and his quality of life has not been compromised. So for Don, Mayo Clinic is the epitome of competence. It did everything that he could have ever dreamed that it could do. Mayo Clinic goes about its functional work through teamwork. A team of doctors, a team of healthcare providers, including more than doctors, are what takes care of an individual patient. The Mayo brothers knew from the outset that healthcare really was a team sport, not an individual sport. Don met his 3 physicians on his first day at Mayo Clinic, and they remain his team today. So when he goes back for a checkup, he sees all 3 of them. Clinical teamwork is facilitated at Mayo Clinic because everyone, all of the nurses, the custodians, the doctors, all of the administrators, all work for the same organization. Everyone is on a salary. No one makes more money or less money by doing or not doing something that a colleague might be better equipped to do. This statement from William J. Mayo, made in 1910, is the moral compass of Mayo Clinic, and it captures 2 of the most important concepts that explain the success of the organization. This was a graduation address. He was being somewhat eloquent and oratorical. He said, "The best interest of the patient is the only interest to be considered." The organization has boiled that down into more common man language by saying the needs of the patient come first. That's what William Mayo was saying. And that is the primary value of Mayo Clinic. It is the primary value for the entire organization. And the thing that's remarkable to me, and I came to Mayo when I was 50 years old, and I'd worked in other organizations. What amazed me was that everyone in the organization knew the needs of the patient come first. I heard it in committee meetings. I heard it from nurses. I heard it from everyone in the organization. Here's a value statement that is in the mind and on the lips of virtually every employee. The second part of this statement, however, is the part where the teamwork becomes also a value, an important character of Mayo. In order that the sick may have the benefit of advancing knowledge, union of forces is necessary. It's become necessary to develop medicine as a cooperative science. The pooling of talent, then, is one of the things that Mayo Clinic does best. Patients don't just get the doctor. They get the whole company. Len and I have written about Mayo Clinic as a department store in which every conceivable need is present in that organization, and that which is needed for the individual patient then can be drawn upon to benefit the needs of the patient. We also want to make the distinction that Mayo Clinic is not a mall. It is not an organization characterized by lots of individual shops, boutiques, that have their own interest. It is one organization where everything is focused on the needs of the patient. A culture of teamwork, then, is the character of Mayo Clinic. And it's important to know that this is not created by exhortation. We don't tell people to be teams. It's just the way Mayo Clinic does the business. And it also provides the tools necessary to function as a team. There's been a common medical record since 1905 at Mayo Clinic. All of the doctors, the hospital, all of that information is in one place. It's now an electronic record, but that's one of the ways that Mayo Clinic has facilitated teamwork. It also uses communication tools very effectively. A paging system built in the 1960s, still not superseded, enables any doctor at Mayo Clinic or anyone carrying one of these pagers to dial in 5 numbers and talk to an individual that they want to speak to. It's a remarkable system. And there's an appointment system that builds time into people's calendars to function as team members and collaborators. Because of this environment that is created, this culture that exists, we have many doctors and actually other employees who say they are better employees at Mayo Clinic than any other place they have worked. I had a young woman who was a receptionist in Scottsdale, and she was talking about what she was doing as an employee of Mayo. She was just thrilled to work at Mayo Clinic. And she said, I'm a better employee at Mayo than any other place that I've worked. But we also have doctors who say this, and that they are better because of this collaboration that goes on and the education that's inherent in collaboration. So the internist says, if I order a test, I might get a call from a fellow or a fellow staff member saying, that's not the test we would use this year. The current approach would be this, and then that's a learning moment for that individuals. Robert Rizza, an endocrinologist, says then, I never feel I'm in a room by myself, even when I am. But in reality, it's hard for anyone at Mayo Clinic to be in a room by themselves, particularly in patient care, because the entire comments of their colleagues are available at their fingertips on the electronic medical record. They're also available through a quick phone call. Mechanic clues are extremely important because they create first impressions. They set up expectations. They suggest something about value. Just as walking into a McDonald's restaurant is different than walking into a fine restaurant with nice lighting, candles, and linen on the table. Different sense of expectations, a different set of values suggested. So, these first impressions say, do they have their act together? Are they careful? Can I figure out where I'm going to go? Facilities, of course, are full of clues. They communicate constantly. There are no words involved, but they are communicating with these clue-sensitive customers. In the case of healthcare, very clue-sensitive customers. And then they tell a story about the kind of service that people should expect. They convey respect for patients who use, or the individuals who use the space, or they could convey lack of respect. Patients are under incredible stress. I have two deceased brothers who got cancer diagnoses at Mayo. And that gave me, in living their experience with them, I was able to see those people that I meet in the hall and have a sense of the kind of burdens that they're carrying. It's just incredible to think of the messages that people are carrying as they're walking through the halls of healthcare facilities. They're under huge amounts of stress. And so the question that people who build buildings and people who plan buildings have to consider is, do they compound stress or do they help relieve it? Mayo Clinic's facility design philosophy is captured here in this list. And so these are, in a sense, the instructions that the architectural firms receive from the facilities individuals at Mayo when they start building facilities. Offer a place of refuge, a place where there can be some comfort. Connect to nature. Emphasize natural light. Mute noise. Noise, particularly in hospitals, is one of the great negatives of a healthcare experience. But a well-designed and conceived facility and well-conceived equipment can mitigate that. Create positive distractions. Create something that people are going to, that's strong enough that they're going to notice it, at least for a fleeting moment, and maybe then forget about the heavy burdens they're carrying. Certainly one has to convey respect and caring, making it easy for all people to get around. Has to symbolize as well the competence. The quality of care you get at a place, the functional quality, should be reflected by the physical quality of the environment. Minimize the impression of crowding. Facilitate wayfinding. Accommodate families. In healthcare, one is dealing with more than just a patient. You're dealing with a family system, and sometimes in certain cultural situations, those actually can be large congregations of people. It's also important that facilities be pleasing to individuals. I'm going to show you some pictures of the lobby of the Gonda building. And I can tell in a few minutes, and I'm going to tell you that I actually make a detour on my way to work, or when I was working, I would make detours there to walk through that space, because it's one of those things where you kind of work in an organization and you pinch yourself saying, is this real? How can I be so lucky as to work in an organization that is this kind of place? And the kind of service that people deliver then can be influenced by the quality of the environment that they work in. And then certainly they have to enhance practice integration. This is the two-level lobby of the Gonda building that I was describing to you a minute ago. It's a beautiful space. There's a ground level and a subway, as we call it, a pedestrian underground entrance level. There's a connection to the patient parking ramp that they can use to get down to the underground level, and so avoid any exposure to the sometimes harsh environments of Minnesota. I had a woman in a focus group a few years ago who said to me, I felt better the moment I stepped on campus. This is a woman who came to Rochester, Minnesota with a devastating diagnosis. She actually didn't think that they would probably be able to do anything for her. But she came to Mayo because she wanted to come to the place where she could get a definitive answer and then know what she had to live with. And she said, when I stepped onto the campus, she hadn't been in a building yet, she just looked at them from the outside, and I felt better. I knew that I had been to the right place. She wasn't healed, but she had this sense of confidence that she was finding competence at Mayo. The wave wall of glass that you see there creates a gentle environment. There's a nice movement as patients walk by. Natural light, lots of marble, clear signage. There's a piano available in this space that anyone is invited to play. These are terraced gardens outside the subway level, and what they do is make two levels of the lobby both seem like ground level lobbies. The piano is a gift from a donor, a grateful patient. It's one of the most wonderful pianos in the world, a Dusseldorf. And her instruction was that anyone who wants to play should be able to. I was in the facility on Monday. There was a young girl who looked like 12 years old playing the piano rather beautifully. When I went home that evening, there was a woman who looked to be 80 years old who was playing the piano, again, beautifully. It's there for whomever wants to play. And it's a place where people can express themselves, have wonderful diversions. One year, not too long ago, there was a volunteer playing a piano, and one of the world's most famous pop musicians walked through and started singing Christmas carols. Another time I walked through the lobby and there was a woman paraplegic in a wheelchair who had an attendant who was pushing the wheelchair, and they were dancing and the woman was moving her arms to do her dance to express her feelings and her emotions. Beautiful designs and artwork are available wherever one is in the clinic. This is what you see if you step off an elevator in the Gonda building. And you notice at the far end there are a couple of chairs that give a private place, a refuge for patients who want to have a place to spend some time. In Jacksonville, there's actually a meditation island. This is kind of a tidal pool. It fluctuates with the tide. And that's a space over there with some artwork, some sculpture, and people are invited to go there and deal with the thoughts that are coming to their minds. This is some newly designed pediatric space in Rochester, in a renovated area of the Mayo building. It's interesting because it's a children's waiting room, but there are no toys. But the walls of this entire facility have things of interest to patients. There's a video link up to the Minnesota Zoo, and those panels, actually panels all around the room, celebrate the flora and the fauna of the upper Midwest. There you see a child interacting with the environment. The lighting is subdued so as not to stimulate the children, but if they walk by a certain spot on this wall, fireflies will begin to twinkle very subtly in the background. Here's one of the tributaries to the great Mississippi River. It's the river theme that is operating there. Flows through an examination room. You'll see there is a couch. It has just one arm on it. We'll say a little bit about that later. But this is a typical examination room. Not visible in the photo is a curtained area where patients can privately put on and take off their clothes. St. Mary's Hospital operates as a Catholic hospital. It's actually part of Mayo Clinic today. But this is a new meditation space created about 10 years ago. If you were to move from this fountain to the left, you would find yourself in a small prayer room with rugs and a compass in the floor pointing toward Mecca, a space made specifically to meet the spiritual needs of the Muslim patients. And if you were to go to the right, you would find a similar space with Christian imagery. Here's a nursing station, nicely located, nicely lighted, and quite accessible to the patients and their family members. In Scottsdale, Arizona, this is our main clinic building. Mayo Clinic actually needs to have vertical space to facilitate quick movement of physicians or team members. It just works better than walking long distances in halls. There's a building height limitation in Scottsdale, and so there are actually 2 floors of the clinic that are underground here to facilitate in that vertical integration. Doesn't do much for natural light, I might say. But this is a nice underground lobby with skylights, and this is the primary lobby that patients enter. A fountain that gives some of the sounds of nature, nice space. Here's the hospital in Phoenix. Looking out of those windows, if you look out those windows, you see the mountains in the background. And here's some wonderful space inside that lobby, an atrium that opens onto all the levels of the hospital, as well as the fountain there on the left-hand side of the picture. This is a way that indicates that Mayo Clinic shows respect for its patients. It's an automobile that was put into the building during construction. It enables people, rehab patients, to practice getting in and out of the automobile in a private setting, as opposed to on the front, at the front drive of the medical center. Research on outpatient facilities has shown that attractive facilities are associated with these perceptions from patients. That there's a higher quality of care, reduced anxiety, shorter waiting, and more positive interaction with the staff. Humanic clues are the clues that probably lead to most of the delight of the patients. It's that human interaction that takes place between a caregiver and a patient. It's a great opportunity for pleasant surprise. Mayo Clinic earns the word of mouth that I discussed earlier, not only by how well it treats patients medically, but how well it treats them personally, the dignity, the esteem, and the respect that they feel. In service values, the values of the performer influence the value of the service. Mayo Clinic, and there's a chapter in the book that you can read, where you can read this in some detail, spends a great deal of time trying to hire the right kind of people. It's the values of people don't really change. Their skills might be able to be trained, but values are difficult to change. And so hiring the right people is extremely important. And so a candidate that says, I did this, I did this, I did this, is not someone who's probably going to end up getting hired. It's not the language to use in an interview. But it's important to remember that these humanic clues can also show disrespect as well as respect. And disrespectful service is inherently poor service. Respectful service includes the following: acknowledging the patient's presence. I had a mother who a few years ago said that her child's pediatrician was wonderful because she always spoke to the child rather than to the parent. My grandson, who had a 2-year exam not long ago, was listening to a conversation between his doctor and his mother, and the doctor said, "Does he speak?" And before my daughter could respond, my little grandson said, "He speaks." And that was his way of saying, you guys aren't noticing me. I'm actually here. I'm a human being. I know what's going on. You got to respect their voice. You've got to respect their time, their privacy. Give patients self-esteem. Expectations, of course, as well, for fair, non-discriminatory service. I'm going to read a story, and then I'm going to turn it over to Len, who's going to talk about the lessons. This is one of the favorite stories that we have in the book, and it's very illustrative of this idea of showing respect and of great humanic clues. It comes from an email written by a Mayo Clinic employee to the chair of the emergency department. I'm remiss in not sending you this email earlier, but I wanted to recount an experience that I had in the emergency room about 3 months ago with Dr. Luis Harrow. I want to share firsthand with you what an extraordinary physician he is. I live with my mother, who's 91 and has fairly severe dementia. About 3 months ago, I came home to find her outside on the lawn. She'd fallen, was unable to get up, and had a nasty bruise and scrape on her elbow. Now, she's a tiny woman, so I managed to get her up, and we headed for the emergency room, and once there, we were seen quickly. Dr. Harrow introduced himself and was very patient and kind, and spoke with enough volume that she could hear. As he examined her, he asked her to stand and take a few steps. As she began to do so, she bumped into him. Now, my mother in her day was quite a wit, and some of that has remained. She looked up at him after bumping him and said, "Well, I suppose we could waltz. And he replied, yes, we could. And then he proceeded to take her in his arms and waltz a few steps around the cubicle. My mother was absolutely enchanted, as she loves to dance, and I started to cry. The sight of this tiny, fragile old woman being waltzed around the room by this most handsome young man was just too much. I don't think I've ever been prouder to be a Mayo employee than that night. To witness that interaction and to know this is the caliber of doctor we have here, someone whose medical expertise is given, but whose compassion and kindness and humanness is extraordinary and very moving. I know in the grand scheme of emergency medicine, this scenario has little significance. My mother had a bad bruise, but was really just fine. Her physical symptoms healed in a day or two, but the healing that occurred that evening with his interaction with her is really what sets Mayo apart and will last forever in my memory. Len?
Thank you, Kent. Good morning. I'm not doing so well, but I really wanted to try to speak to you today. I'm so glad to be here. This is such a magnificent space, and I've heard so much about the orthopedic clinic here, the neuroscience clinic, and the other groups that are present today. Can't thank you for subbing for me today with very little preparation and very little sleep. I think he did a magnificent job giving a talk that I was supposed to give today. Can you hear me? Okay. I want to finish up with some lessons from the presentation this morning and our research at Mayo Clinic. Lesson number 1 is define what great service means. Define what great service means. Every great service organization needs to know what it wants to be famous for with its customers. What do you want to be famous for with your customers? You can't really do clue management until you answer that question. And once you answer that question, once you know what story you want to tell, then you know what clues you need to tell it. And I think you have a pretty good idea of the story you want to tell here. So that's lesson number 1. Mayo Clinic knows the story it wants to tell. The needs of the patient come first. It's a team medicine model. You get the whole company. It's very efficient. They don't waste your time. And it cares. It cares. That's the story it wants to tell. And it's marvelous in managing the clues to tell that story. Lesson number 2 is major in minors, which means do the little things well, because the little things add up and create the experience. Pay attention to the details of the customer's experience. Kent showed you the pictures of Mayo, just a few of many pictures we could have shown you. And he showed you a picture of a conventional exam room. And I was fascinated with the Mayo Clinic exam room. As a patient, I've been in many exam rooms in my life, but I was fascinated with their exam room because of the attention to the details. Remember the sofa with one arm? For our book, we interviewed the guy that designed that sofa. And in the interview, he said, "Why one arm?" And he said, because with one arm, there's more room for a patient who's not feeling well to lay down. That's majoring in minors. act like a small organization, even if large. A key challenge for large organizations is to maximize the advantages of being large while minimizing the disadvantages of being large. So acting small, what it means is being quick, being personal, being flexible, being non-bureaucratic. Mayo has more than 43,000 employees. But because of its team model, its team medicine model, it's able to act like a small organization, even though it's huge, because the team becomes, in effect, Mayo Clinic to the patient. Remember Don? Kent told you about Don. Don was basically taken care of in his 3 months at Mayo Clinic by 6 people. The ENT, the medical oncologist, the radiation oncologist, the chemotherapy and radiation technicians, and Rose at the front desk. They were the face of Mayo Clinic to Don. And Don knows all of those people by name. He sends them Christmas cards. When he goes back, he makes sure that he talks to every one of them. Even if he doesn't have an appointment, he makes sure that he sees Rose at the front desk. He takes her flowers when he goes. That's Mayo Clinic to Donna. Be high-tech and high-touch. Great service organizations are both. They're high-tech when patients need tech, and they're high-touch when patients need high-touch, which is all the time. Mayo has the latest and the best equipment, just as I'm sure you do here. But as Kent pointed out, it's the humanic clues, more than anything else, that really makes Mayo special. It's the people and how they treat the patient, how they treat families, how they respect each other, how they respect the institution and the legacy the Mayo brothers left. It's the people, it's the touch part, not just the tech part that makes Mayo Clinic, Mayo Clinic. I want you to write down these 3 questions, 3 key questions for everybody that's managing anything. Question number 1. Are we hiring the right people? Are we hiring the right people? Question number 2. Do they work hard? Do they work hard? Are they truly engaged in the work here? And question number 3, are they growing in their work? Are they growing in their skills and their knowledge? Are they developing? The answer to those 3 questions at the Mayo Clinic are yes, yes, and yes. And they should be the answers for you too. The fact that Mayo Clinic can answer yes to those 3 questions is one of the most important explanations for 140 years of success. This is the most amazing service organization I've ever studied. It's not perfect. We don't want to misrepresent. Between us, we know an awful lot about Mayo Clinic. I spent my sabbatical year there, living in the Mayo Clinic. It's not perfect. It's a work in progress for 140 years, just as you are in your practices, works in progress. It's a journey. There's always more to do to get better. And that's true at Mayo. And when I finished my sabbatical, I had lots of advice for the management of Mayo Clinic, as Kent knows. Some of which they listened to, including spending less time on committees. They even appointed a committee to work on committees. Be high tech, high touch. Invest in alignment. Invest in alignment. Mayo Clinic benefits so much from an almost perfect alignment between the personal values of the individual employee and the institutional values of Mayo Clinic. When someone works for an organization whose values are the same as their own, it's very motivating and empowering. At Mayo Clinic, you don't have a lot of role conflict if you work there, because what you're supposed to do is take care of the patient. And most people go into healthcare to do that. So at Mayo Clinic, they don't have to go against their instincts in order to meet the mandates of the institution. Lesson 6 is play brand defense, not just brand offense. I'm a marketing professor, and for years I've been teaching brand offense until I started to study Mayo Clinic. And now I teach both offense and defense. What do I mean when I say play brand defense? I mean the effort that the clinic goes to protect the purity of its name. It's like protecting the family name, which in effect it is. Mayo Clinic has established specific brand guardrails, rules, guidelines, through which any proposed institutional activity must be vetted before it's approved. Kent was head of the brand committee at Mayo Clinic for 10 years. And any proposal would come in front of that committee before it was approved. And so while we've been reading in the last couple of years about some prestigious academic medical centers and scandals that they've had, we've not read stories like that about Mayo Clinic. That doesn't mean we won't someday. But they're so cautious and protective and careful to protect the honor of the family name. You'll never see the Mayo Clinic name on a hot air balloon, because that violates one of the written brand guardrails, which is the Mayo Clinic brand is not to ever be used in a manner that trivializes the name or the institution. You'll never see the name Mayo Clinic on a hot air balloon. Compete with volunteerism. All employees are volunteers. And one of the differences between mediocre and great service organizations is the great service organizations get more volunteerism from their staff. Mayo Clinic, a salary-only institution, there is no incentive pay at all. And by the way, when we did our road show, when our book came out, did our book tour and talked to media, that's the one issue they wanted to talk to us about the most. How can you actually get productivity when you don't give people bonuses and incentive pay? That was before all the Wall Street scandal stuff happened, by the way. Maybe they'd ask a different question now. Mayo Clinic is one of the highest volunteerism organizations I've ever studied in my career. What I mean by volunteerism is I mean discretionary effort. The concept of discretionary effort is the difference between the maximum amount of energy someone can bring to their job, the maximum they can bring to their job day in and day out, and the minimum amount of effort required to avoid any kind of penalty. So we're all volunteers. Because in all of our jobs, there's a difference between the maximum we can do and the minimum required to avoid some kind of penalty. And that's volunteerism. The great service organizations get more volunteerism than the mediocre ones do. Why? Teamwork, the teamwork culture. You don't want to let your teammates down. Why? The alignment culture. You believe in the purpose of the institution. The power of the brand. People who work at Mayo today talk about the Mayo brothers. They talk about the legacy. They talk about their personal responsibility to live up to the ideals of the institution that the family created. It's a very powerful motivator. There's another important influence, and that's my last lesson, and that is the influence of social profit. An important influence in volunteerism is an organization's commitment to generating social profit. Organizations create social profit when their activities contribute to a better quality of life. And social profit depends on the spirit of generosity. It's common to think of generosity as an organizational output. If a company or a nonprofit is successful and generates a lot of revenue, it can afford to be generous. That's all backward. Generosity is an input to service organization success because it inspires people to be better volunteers. Mayo Clinic, and we say this in the first chapter, Mayo Clinic is defined by the spirit of generosity. The purpose of Mayo Clinic for 140 years has been more than just making money. And I think if you're going to build a powerful healthcare brand where you have a very special kind of customer you're serving, a customer who arrives for your service with some combination of illness, disease, pain, uncertainty, anxiety, and fear. Your customer is so patient, we have a special name. We call your customer patience. I think if you're going to build a great healthcare organization, as Mayo Clinic has done, your moral compass has to be more than just making money. The fact that Mayo Clinic has lived for 140 years is remarkable. The fact that no one has screwed it up, this organization, in 140 years is amazing. And it's a great tribute to the founders and the management model and the values and the culture they created. Kent talked about at the outset that the Mayo brothers were fantastic surgeons at the time. They knew about sterility before most surgeons did. They knew the importance of washing their hands before most surgeons did. And so the complications were less at Mayo Clinic, and the word spread, and people started to come from surrounding states and then from surrounding countries. But what built the Mayo Clinic was not the surgical skill as much as the management model and the values. So we're going to tell you one final story and then open it up for questions, and then we'll be able to quit right on time at 9:30. Kent, do you want to read the final story?
I can if you'd like. Save your voice.
Yes. It's right here.
This is a story that we discovered in our research that was published in the local newspaper in Rochester, Minnesota in 1931. And here's a quote, rather long quote, from William J. Mayo. By 1894, my brother and I had paid for our homes. Our clinic was on its feet. Patients kept coming. Our theories seemed to be working out. The mortality rate among our patients was satisfyingly low, and money began to pile up. To us, it seemed like more money than any two men had the right to have. We talked it over a lot in that year of 1894. Then we came to a decision. That year, we put aside half of our income. We couldn't touch a cent of that for ourselves. I know it may sound mawkish, it may sound like egotism and arrogance when it was none of those things, but that money seemed somehow like holy money to us. From 1894 onwards, we've never used more than half of our incomes on ourselves and our families. My brother and I have put ourselves on salaries now. The salaries are far less than half our incomes, and we live within them. That holy money, as we call it, had to go back to the service of humanity that had paid it to us. We try to take up the surgical medical education of selected and promising young men where the state leaves off. My interest and my brother's interest is to train men for service of humanity. What can I do with one pair of hands? But if I can train 50 or 500 pairs of hands, I've helped pass on the torch. And we have hands to train, nearly 300 of them now with Mayo Foundation, and a waiting list of some 1,400. They are the ones who will carry on. I invite your questions. Yes.
When you have employees that you can't answer the few questions to when you're hiring great people, they don't fit that model, what do you do with these employees? Or what happens to them, or, after you hire them? Or is that considered before you hire them?
Ideally, it's considered before you hire them. As someone who's a manager for people for a long time, I can tell you that I didn't bat 1,000%. It's probably impossible. The Personnel Committee at Mayo has taken a position in more recent years that the organization really cannot tolerate people who are living outside those values. And that includes physicians, high-level administrators, as well as staff employees. We write about this in sort of a subtle way in the book, but a physician who acts disrespectfully to his or her colleagues is often given a month, a week, whatever seems appropriate, amount of time to go home and think about whether or not they really want to be a Mayo Clinic doctor. And if they do, then they know what the expectations are in terms of interpersonal relationships and building. And similarly, that kind of thing occurs, and it has occurred for years, for a longer period of time within the allied health staff. And so that, I think those cases need to be taken care of, and Mayo Clinic has done a very good job of taking care of that historically in the allied health staff, and recently has done very well within the medical staff, the professional staff.
Great concept on volunteerism. How do you quantify or measure what you're getting between the minimum and that discretionary effort in the organization?
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. The question is, how do you quantify the difference between the maximum and the minimum effort? And it's really It's really not a quantifiable issue. It's more a leadership issue, a coaching issue, and it's more a fact of listening as a leader, as a manager, to the sounds of the business, and being present and watching, even if watching what's going on, and listening to the comments of teammates and how the team is working. And you pretty much know. One thing that that Kent didn't mention that relates to this question, but also to the first question that was asked about, and that is that Mayo does try hard, first of all, to hire the right people. And so when you interview at Mayo, you're really interviewed as much for your values as for anything else. They've done a lot of background research before you even hired, before you were even brought for the interviews or a finalist for an interviews on your technical skills, your medical background, if you're a clinician. And more than 50% of Mayo's clinical staff, physician staff, are trained in one way or another at the Mayo Clinic. Residents, fellows, medical school. And so in effect, if you're going to be a physician there and you come from one of the Mayo Clinic training opportunities, you've had an extended multi-year interview. So they pretty much know your values. But what Mayo tries to do, if somebody isn't working out in the first job, before taking the step of terminating that person, is ask to step back and ask the question, do we have the right person but in the wrong job? And Mayo is a big enough organization and a complex enough organization that there are lots of different kinds of jobs. And so lots of stories, Kent, that I think you have seen in your career of people that were foundering in the first job and wound up flourishing rather than leaving the institution.
Let me give you one other dimension of volunteerism. In an email that our CEO sent around to all of the employees last week, he told a story, or he included from a letter written by an 88-year-old woman whose husband had been transported by helicopter to St. Mary's Hospital. She drove for 2 or 3 hours, 88-year-old woman. She got to the hospital, walked inside, and her mission was to find out where her husband was. She had no idea. Now, 1,400 rooms, it has acres of floor space. And as she was wandering around, she decided to get on the elevator, and there was a woman inside carrying lots of things in her arms. And the woman recognized that she was distraught, stepped out and said, can I help you? She told the stories. And the woman said, okay, we'll find him. And the woman indicates, this elderly woman, in her letter to the CEO. I said to her, but you work here, you're going somewhere. You have time to do this. The woman said, we're going to find your husband. The point that I want to make here, and it's a point that's in the book, is that at Mayo Clinic, no one will ever get disciplined for not showing up to work on time if they are helping a patient. Okay? When given those options, you always do the right thing for the patient. And that experience was wonderful for that elderly woman.
Questions? Anybody else? Yes, Doctor.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for coming and spreading the word of Mayo Clinic, because I think it's so consistent with what we're trying to do here. And my question has to do with pretty much the same questions that have been raised here. When you look at, we got the message, you got to hire the right person, right? And we understand that. But now if you look at new employee education, and if you look at, once these people are working there, accountability, doing the things that you want to do, how would you rank all of this? In other words, hiring the person is 95%, education is what, can you just go through that, those three different areas?
Yes. You want to go ahead?
I can.
Go ahead.
Well, oh yes. The question is, how do you, I guess, perpetuate this service model at Mayo? Is it hiring the right people? Is it with the education and training, or is it with managerial accountability in evaluations? I would say that 90% of it is really hiring the right person. We've had a number of people come to us at Mayo Clinic and say, you know, we want to use whatever course you're using for your front desk people to provide to use in our organization, so we can train people like Mayo. The reality is that we don't really have those courses. There are some training certainly, and we do have a huge amount of employee education, but we don't have a module that everyone has to go through in order to learn how to treat people nicely. There is a huge amount, however, of what I would call cultural education that is on the job. And part of it is the modeling that the existing employees do in an organization. And the way they talk, the way they treat people then become obvious to new employees. This is the way we do things here. And if someone is out of line a little bit, they might just have someone say, well, you know, here at Mayo Clinic, we would do that this way. And so it's a very gentle kind of training that goes on. And that's the most important part of creating then this culture. Mayo had the experience of opening new clinics in Jacksonville, Florida, and Scottsdale, Arizona in the mid-1980s. There was a huge amount of reticence within the organization about that, because there was a myth, we now know, although it's still believed by many, a myth that the secret to Mayo Clinic was the people of Scandinavian heritage and Germanic heritage who lived on farms in southeastern Minnesota. Sort of a self-congratulatory kind of thing, with really nice people. And other people aren't going to be that nice, so how can we run a clinic in those locations? Well, they did two things. One, everyone through the level of supervisor at these new clinics was actually a transplant of someone who had experience in Rochester. So this was, you know, like inoculating this new organization with the good flora that existed in Rochester. But then there was also a thing that happened that was really a learning for the organization. And that is that niceness is not confined to people of Northern European descent, people with blonde hair. There are people from all cultures who care deeply about other human beings. And so we have found people in Florida, we found lots of people in Arizona who are able to naturally live those values that are really important. So in terms of evaluation, yes, the employee evaluations do include measures of this, but in my experience, except for extreme deviancy, it's hard to really quantify that.
And one final comment to the question, and that is that it's extremely important, in addition to hiring the right people, which I agree with Kent is 90%. Input shapes output. But in addition to that, it's so important to promote the right people to be in charge of other people. When we make a mistake and put the wrong person into a middle management position, we screw everything up. And Mayo is really quite careful, or tries to be quite careful in identifying people that have the requisite values and the requisite leadership skills, and then invest in their leadership training. making sure that they get a lot of committee experience, that they rotate into different assignments. They're on a leadership track. They've been spotted by somebody high in the organization as a potential leader. And then Mayo makes an investment so that they have a pool of people to promote into these middle management positions. So that too is a real key. Yes, sir.
When you're managing, you're not always in the trenches, or you're planning, you're doing budgets. How do you empower your other employees to make their coworkers accountable for their actions at the point that they have?
You want to take that?
Go ahead.
We're a team. What empowers the employees is the culture. And you can't get in trouble at Mayo Clinic, as Kent just emphasized, but it bears repeating. If you're trying to do the right thing for the patient. And sometimes that means standing up for the patient. Standing up for the patient if you see the patient being mistreated by some part of the organization. One of the questions that Mayo will often ask in an interview, because they use behavioral interviewing techniques to design to surface people's true values. They use questions designed to bring the real person out, rather than questions that might have been rehearsed before the interview. And one of the questions that is a perfect Mayo Clinic question for an interview is the question, tell us about a time in a previous job where you disagreed with something a manager or a supervisor did, and how you handled that. And the answer to a question like that tells the interviewers a lot about the person who's being interviewed and whether that person would be a good fit for the Mayo Clinic. Because at the Mayo Clinic, the patient is the reason for being for the institution. And so it's the culture. It's not a training course. It's not a mandate. It's the culture that empowers the individual to take the action that's necessary. We are out of time. Steve, would you like to close the session?
Thanks.
Len and Kent, on behalf of Myron Construction, Orthopedic and Sports Institute, and all the organizations that are with us, I think we can see why we have two of the leading healthcare thinkers in the entire world with us today, which is an incredibly special treat. Thank you once again. We appreciate it. When we opened, Dennis mentioned if you could write down a thought. I'm going to give you an example of one that's right here at the Institute to share with you, but if you could give us a thought, leave it at the front with Sandy, and then we'll compile that information. Also going around is an email address sign-up list, and as you noticed, we have our friends from ARC Studio here creating a high-definition DVD of this event. So if you'd like this to share with your teams, back at your organization, we'll have that available, but we need to know how to get a hold of you. So that's coming around. If you haven't seen that, who has the clipboard? Is anybody? It's in the back of the room. Thank you. If anybody needs to put their name in that, just let us know. The Institute has been working hard on creating an extraordinary patient experience. And I want to give you a quick example of one of those little details that Len talked about that have absolutely captured and captivated the patients that they serve here. As you know, the Institute is in the orthopedic business. They're in the business of helping people replace joints and helping with muscle tears. And this nice garment has been used for literally, I don't know if it's been centuries, but it's been a long time throughout the hospital industry. And it's an open back garment that you use in going through surgical procedures. The nurses here decided to start to interview patients, what they liked about the past, what they didn't like. And one of the things that they did not like was exposing yourself to the world as you're walking through facilities. So an innovation team that was led by the surgery director here, Chris, decided, you know what? We're going to think a little different. Why do we need to use this? Who made the rules? Who said you have to wear an open back gown, especially if people are uncomfortable? Patients weren't complaining. They were happy because they wanted to get the surgery, so that was part of the program. But along the way, it was funny, at an NBA game, Chris was at the game watching the Bucks, and she said, you know what, the guys that play basketball have these really cool pants that kind of tear away from the sides. Why don't we use something like that? So lo and behold, the ortho pants were invented. Comfortable fleece pants, a little side pocket, and a nice opening on the left-hand side or the right-hand side, depending on where surgery is, which also, by the way, helps in making sure that we're operating on the right knee or the right leg. This is a detail, and the only reason we're showing this is we'd like to know what you're working on, ideas that you have that we can continue to collaborate with as organizations for our community to make it a better place for all of our patients. As I mentioned earlier, Dr. Berry and Dr. Seltman will be here to sign books. We have a limited schedule, unfortunately. We have our next stop that we need to be at noon, but we have about a half hour, 25 minutes. So thank you for graciously offering to do that. We have a book table just in the back by Mike and Dennis. So on behalf of all of us at Myron, we realize the key is not just building buildings, but we passionately want to bring dreams to life and bring the building to life internally as well. Thanks so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you so much. She'll really enjoy that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you for your time today. It was very enlightening.
Oh, well, thank you.